Hello and welcome to Filmsland Stream's post-film conversation for Reinventing Recycling. My name is Eric Siler, and I'm an instructor of film, media arts, and communications, as well as moderator for this conversation. We're very pleased to be joined by the director of Reinventing Recycling, Jay Windland. Jay is an award-winning filmmaker, and he's also a photographer. He comes with us with the background in broadcast news. He went on to create a branded video content and capture stories from media outlets such as Money Magazine and Discovery Science. But back in 2020, Jay co-directed Vertical, The Future of Farming, which became a finalist in the New York International Awards and was awarded Best Short Documentary in the Angels Documentary Festival. Please welcome the talented Jay Windland. Hello, Jay, and welcome.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. This is such a really educational film. I felt as if I was reading a short story in which I just wanted to see what happens on the next page. And I felt a little bit of guilt not knowing things like this and that. It's just really interesting. And now, can you just tell us how you came up with this? Are you like one of these recycling, people all the time, or how did this come up?
Well, I think I became a recycling person along the way. And I think that like my process, my journey was kind of similar to what you described. I was learning something every day. And that just kind of gave birth to the film as I picked up enough things that I wanted to share with other people. But the original kind of impetus for the whole thing would actually begin with sort of maybe heated discussions that I would have with my wife sometimes when we'd be cleaning up our kitchen after making dinner, and I'd go to put something in the recycle bin, and she'd go, "Oh no, can't put that in the recycling bin," and I would be like, "That doesn't make any sense," and I would look it up on my phone, and it would turn out that I actually could not recycle that thing, and then the next night it would be the same thing, but the tables would be turned, and she would go to put something in the recycle bin, and I would say, "No, you can't do that," and then we just started Googling everything right there on our phones in the kitchen, just trying to figure out on a piece by piece basis, like what can you actually recycle? And the answers that we got weren't really good answers. They didn't make a lot of sense. And that just kind of led to this natural sort of curiosity and kind of the discovery that what we can recycle isn't necessarily just a matter of what can the materials do. It can also be a question of what makes economic sense and the whole existence of this like recycling economy that was on the other side of this. And if something doesn't make economical sense, then it won't be done. And then even though the thing could be recycled, it's unrecyclable. And that was a fascinating thing to me that I just wanted to understand more. And so the film is kind of structured really along the same series of questions that I was asking and the answers that I was digging up. And in the process, finding these people that were working on really cool, innovative strategies to change things, but they were stories that I hadn't heard before. And so I wanted to make sure that I could tell those stories and people could hear about them because they're really exciting.
It is exciting. And when I first came across this documentary, I said to myself, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sure that there's information out there like this, but I discovered this is something new. And why do you think there's not much information out there about the confusion around recycling?
Well, I think for one, it is confusing. It's a hard thing to encapsulate and hand to someone in a simple to understand thing. It's changing constantly, and unlike Europe, for instance, where there are sort of regulatory frameworks that the EU sets for manufacturers and kind of standardizes the production of things. The US doesn't have the same appetite for regulation, and we have a tendency to let companies produce whatever works economically for those companies. And a lot of times that makes this sort of perfect storm of recycling chaos. Um, and in an ideal world, I think we could get all of the manufacturers that produce all of the products that we use and consume in the United States, and get them onto a more compatible system. But in reality, it's an uphill battle, and I think that personally, my view of it is that if scientists can innovate faster and stay out ahead of it, we stand a better chance to recover from the waste crisis that we have today.
So when you made this documentary, what was your goal? Did you want people to change their habits? Did you want the government to get more involved? Tell us about the goal for this film.
That's an interesting question. I've always sort of viewed that as a documentary filmmaker, my goal isn't really to draw conclusions or try to persuade someone. My goal is really to tell a story first, and in this case, the most that I really hoped to do was take a viewer, and in particular, students, high school and college students who are going into STEM fields, who are concerned about environmental topics, and challenge them to look at environmental problems as fundamentally science and engineering problems. And science and engineering problems are susceptible to solution. It can be hard to view it that way when you're looking at something that is such a large and serious threat to our future. But the thing that I continue to find every time I talk to these scientists, every time I met with these people that were working on these really bold, big solutions, is that they all saw the global problem, and without diminishing it, they took it seriously and looked at it and said, but how can we solve it? And that mindset, I think, is kind of what makes the difference between the people that are really out there doing something, and those that are just being worried about it. And I think there's so much, climate anxiety, particularly amongst young people. And I kind of wanted to just point the way and tell the story of some really bright individuals that were rising to meet the challenge and were saying, okay, but how can we solve it? And inviting them to look at it the same way.
Interesting. Yes, and so much can come out of this. I can see, teachers working with their students and come up with various activities. And before we began this interview, we talked off camera, and you had an interesting idea for a student activity. I don't know if you want to share that with our viewers.
Sure. Yeah, we've been working on kind of early phases of sort of an educator's guide, and just sort of some ideas that we could give to educators to say, well, here are some of the things you could do. And one of the things that I would love to be able to see happen is, um, that we could have a group of students and they could be assigned to find and study their local recycling guides, figure out what is and isn't recyclable in their area, and then go out into their school or community and actually do a survey of what's really in their school or their community recycling bins, and then give it a report card, actually assign a letter grade to how their school or community is doing recycling. Maybe they're doing well, but maybe they're not.
And I think that's an excellent activity. It'll encourage collaboration, research, reporting, documentation, and so forth. So teachers out there, I hope you consider doing something like this or something similar. The film itself, I took maybe about a year and a half, almost 2 years to make the film. And like I said, there was so much information, so much misinformation out there. Tell us a little bit about how you actually compiled this together to, tell this story.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, in the earliest phases, it was really just me reading a lot. And that's something that I'll do. I'll go into a period of 3 or 4 months where I just read absolutely everything I can get my hands on, something that I'm intensely curious about, and I'll take notes. And that's throughout that is kind of, I'm asking myself, could this make a film? Like, would this be something that I would be interested in watching? And all signs pointed to yes. And so I started to just reach out to people that had written papers, scientists who had appeared on panels that I watched, or podcasts that I listened to, and just kind of dug a little bit deeper, because every time I would read something, I would come away with, but what about this? What about this? I would have so many questions that I would want to follow up, and those just kind of led to these conversations. And where it really started to take off was when I started to meet with scientists who then said, you know, who you should really speak to is this other scientist who's doing this. And then I would meet with them and they would say, you know, who you should speak to is someone else that's doing this. And that ended up becoming like the basis before we really had like a shape for the film. It was really like a lot of conversations. And I learned a ton, but then it also, it just, we started to connect the dots of opportunities. And so we started to work with the National Renewable Energy Labs in Colorado, and their work on advanced recycling research. And then that ended up connecting us with the Ocean Plastics Recovery Project. And so kind of our first phase was just meeting and sitting down to interview and being able to follow around these scientists and the work that they do, and seeing their labs and seeing the type of projects that they were taking on, how that interfaced with the world. And then meanwhile, they were planning the final expedition to Katmai National Park and the Alaskan wilderness for the Ocean Plastics Recovery Project. It took a little while because that is a really big logistical operation. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, and everyone is living and eating and sleeping on these boats, in some really kind of rough environments. And so it took a little bit of time for the planning, and then we spent about a week on the water and on the beaches out there, and it was really like it was a very unique experience. I mean, we were on the beaches, you know, when we had a chance to set the cameras down for a while because of one thing or another, we just, you know, we put on our work boots and rolled up our sleeves and just did a whole bunch of ocean plastic recovery. And the whole time we had large coastal brown bears walking around us that we always had to be on alert for, which was like not something that I had ever experienced in the process of filming something. Um, and and then finally, you know, our final step was taking all of that material back to Oregon State University and actually seeing what they did to completely close the loop, with their innovative recycling technologies that they do right there on their campus labs. And so it was really, you know, kind of linear. The experience of making it was very similar to the sequence that you see roll out throughout the film. And so that sort of natural, um, you know, turning one page and going right into the next thing it mirrored the process of learning about it for myself too.
I love the fact that, sorry, that you immerse yourself in this. You just weren't just telling the story, that you were actually living the story as well. That's really wonderful. That's why the documentary turned out so well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's sort of, I view it as being like the essence of being like a lifelong learner. I I just go through phase by phase into to different things that just capture my imagination, and I spend a lot of time until I feel like I've really grasped them, and then I've at that point, you know, I end up just running out of people that I can tell about it, you know, just socially, and it's like, okay, it's time to make a film. So
I know you learned so much through this process, and it might be difficult to narrow down to one single item that stood out in this learning process. And I'll start off by telling you mine. what I learned, and I'm challenging the students as well to think about what they've learned too. I learned about, about the robots helping out in the facilities and the high turnover rate as well too. That really struck me in watching this documentary. Can you tell me one item that has stood out to you that you did not know in this entire process?
Well, I would say every part of it was something I didn't know, but I think the one thing that really that impressed me early on was that this really is a matter of economics, and that it's a matter of, like I said earlier, the materials, the materials that we have are a part of the problem, but um, whether or not the actual material can be physically recycled is only one piece of the puzzle. It has to be economical, and when we're talking about recycling, you could almost ask the question, what does it mean to recycle something? I can put something in my bin and say I recycled it, but if that doesn't actually reach the market as a new product, a new thing, it hasn't been recycled. So I can say I recycled it, but in actuality, there needs to be an entire market and an entire economic machine that makes it to where it becomes advantageous to use that to make to make new materials and new products, more so than taking new non-renewable resources from the earth. And so to be able to just take something and say, well, it's theoretically recyclable, it's recyclable in a lab, doesn't really equate to it being factually recyclable until the economics make sense. And to add to that, we have multiple methods of recycling, and there isn't just going to be one right answer. And in fact, when you talk to uh, people who are concerned about environmental issues, people who are active in recycling, one of the things that you're going to see is that a lot of people aren't going to agree on what the best solution is. And the fact is, there's probably not a best solution. There is a menu of options. And we have to build a system that takes each incoming piece and says, what is the quickest and most efficient path? What is the cleanest? What is the most energy efficient path to take this material and turn it into something new with the least amount of waste? And that's a lot more complex than simply saying, well, let's use this. Let's switch to this material for cups. Let's switch to this material for plates, and we'll have the problem solved. It's an entire system, and I don't have all of the answers, but I definitely met many of the bright young minds that are working towards having a complete holistic answer. And that's the most exciting thing for me.
Well, normally this is the part I would ask you, what are you going to do next? But I'm going to offer you a suggestion on what to do next. You said you're working with some bright minds, and I would love to see you work with the bright minds to develop an app in which you can, scan a barcode or show a picture of an item, and it could, tell whether this is recyclable based on your location and what to do with it. So I'm charging you to do that if it's such an interest to you.
That is actually not a bad idea at all. Interestingly, there are similar systems being developed in Europe, where they're making packaging that has virtually invisible embedded codes in them that you can scan with your phone. And while you don't really see the code, it's kind of like it's almost hidden in the packaging design. It's scannable and it'll come up and tell you location based. But we don't necessarily have anything like that working in the United States. Again, because it's kind of hard to get American companies to agree on one single way of doing things. But definitely a good challenge and something that would help a lot of people.
Okay. Well, while you're working on that, I'm sure you'll be working on other film projects. Can you tell us about what that might be?
Well, it's a bit early to say for sure. always have a few months where I just nerd out on something. And I can tell you without necessarily saying I'm going to make a film yet. I've been really taking a lot of interest in there is in the world of architecture, there is a movement called mass timber, and it's a group of engineers and architects who are working on making wooden skyscrapers. And that kind of sounds odd, given that we moved away from making buildings from wood, a century ago, and began making all of our buildings primarily out of steel and concrete. Steel and concrete are both very carbon intensive, energy intensive materials, and we make all of our buildings out of it. There are some really cool projects being developed right now that kind of turn this on its head. And instead, using modern techniques of engineering and manufacturing, are able to make buildings that are just as structurally strong and safe, but entirely made out of wood, which is inherently a massive long-term carbon capture system. And they're actually really beautiful buildings at the same time. So there are some projects underway that are, maybe a little bit pie in the sky, but there's a project that is attempting to get approval to build an 80-story skyscraper in downtown Chicago entirely out of wood. And I've just been following it, completely fascinated with these ideas of how we could kind of transform the landscape of the buildings that we go to school in and that we work in and that we live in, and turn them into these things that are sort of warm and natural and inherently good for the environment. But it's right now, it's just my current topic of reading. So we'll see where it goes.
Well, a happy read. I'm sure you're going to read a lot about it and immerse yourself in that as well, too. And I like the theme that you're sticking with in terms of looking at closer at our environment. Well, Jay Windland, Director of Reinventing Recycling, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really great to talk with you today and super excited to be a part of the program and be able to share what we've done with all of these students and educators.
And thank you to our audience for joining us for this important and invigorating conversation. For more information about our upcoming events, please visit us at clevelandfilm.org. I'm Eric Siler. Thank you.